Welcome to Justice in Two Languages.
Welcome back to Justice in Two Languages with attorney David Elias Idinopulos, founder of Elias Law in Albuquerque, New Mexico. David is a bilingual personal injury attorney who works closely with New Mexicans facing long recoveries after serious crashes, helping them to understand what's ahead, what choices matter, and why the process can feel so overwhelming in the middle of everyday life. I'm Lisa Mosby, your host, and today we're talking about life after a serious crash, from medical care to transportation issues to the unexpected pressures people feel as they try to get back to normal. Welcome, David. Thanks for joining me again.
Thank you so much for having me back, Lisa.
David, recovering from a serious crash affects work, childcare, driving, routines in general. What kinds of day-to-day challenges do you see people dealing with in those first few weeks?
People get used to living a normal life. Everybody that I've ever met, including myself, probably you, we are all creatures of habit, and those habits depend on all kinds of things. It depends on you having a job. It depends on you having transportation. It depends sometimes on you having a network of people that can help you when things sort of go haywire. And so, when an accident happens immediately, and even one of those things is thrown off, it creates a ripple effect. And I'll give you an example. I just started representing literally yesterday a woman who had a pretty serious auto accident. She's got a broken wrist. Broken wrist is a bad injury. She's probably going to have surgery. The biggest issue for her, though, is she had the only car in the family. She was the only driver in the family. She was the person who got herself to work. She got her mother to various appointments. She got her children to daycare, all that kind of stuff. And now, because of this accident, she is without a car. So before we address the medical portion of the case, the most important thing for us to address is we got to get her a car, and we got to get it as quickly as possible. Because without something as simple as transportation, which is something that we take for granted every day, I mean, who doesn't have a car? We all have cars out here in Albuquerque, New Mexico. But without a car, that woman is kind of dead in the water. And so the first problem that we're going to fix, even before we address her medical needs or anything like that, is get this lady into a car so that she can resume some semblance of a normal life.
I wouldn't have thought of that. I always think medical first, medical first. So that's great insight. Treatment plans can feel confusing, especially when multiple specialists get involved. What tends to help people stay on track with their medical care when everything feels so overwhelming?
Yeah, if we can have a good relationship with a medical provider, very often the medical provider will between the two of us, we sort of act as a nurse case manager. So for example, I will get a phone call or an email from a clinic that is treating a client, and they will say, hey, we need to do facet joint injections. This person is still having a great deal of pain. Do you think that the client would be okay with that? Would you recommend it, et cetera, et cetera? And very often, because medical providers, they go from one patient to the next, they don't always have enough time to be able to explain that procedure adequately to a client. So a lot of times, I never intended to go into the medical field, but very often I find myself having to sort of demystify medical treatment, explain to them why it is that they need to do this, explain to them why the treatment is important. A lot of times as well, clients get so busy after an accident because they're going to the medical provider, they're coming to the attorney's office, they've got to arrange alternative transportation. So a lot of times clients have all those difficulties going on, and they need somebody literally to help manage that. And many times they will miss medical appointments and not have an awareness that missing medical appointments will have a real impact on their case. And so we have to sit down and tell them, look, you can't miss a doctor's appointment, because if you miss a doctor's appointment, you're sending the insurance company a message that you're not particularly injured. Because if you were particularly injured, wouldn't you have attended that medical appointment? And oh, by the way, the fact that you missed that medical appointment, now it's in your medical records.
Some injuries don't improve as quickly as people expect. When recovery takes longer, what kinds of pressure do New Mexicans usually start to feel from employers bills, or even family members?
It's not just New Mexicans. Anytime that you are injured, you have literally placed your livelihood sort of in the balance, right? You get a good job, you work that job for 2, 3, 4 years, you have an accident. All of a sudden, you can't get to your job because you don't have a vehicle, or you can't do the job because you have an injury and there's no light duty, or you can't do the job because you just can't do any job no matter what the light duty is. Your employer is not going to wait around for that. I used to appear in front of a judge and I would argue on behalf of my client saying, Your Honor, if you send my client to jail, the job will, he's going to lose his job. And the judge would say to me, oh, the job won't be lost. Someone else will find it. And that's what happens in many cases. So, you have to work like heck to make sure that your client's bases are covered. And sometimes that means that's as simple as giving them advice. If you know that the job will take the client back as long as they have a note from a doctor, the client doesn't necessarily know this. The client has never been put in this situation. So you literally have to tell the client, when you go to your next appointment, get an off work slip or get a light duty slip. Present that to your employer and perhaps they will accommodate you. Or you tell them, look, it's going to be a while. It's going to be 30 days since we can resolve this situation with the car and get you compensation and you go out and buy another car. Do you have anybody that you can carpool with? Do you have anybody that you can borrow a car with just to get to and from work? Sometimes it's a matter of literally telling our client, look, here's the link for the bus schedule. Take a look at the link for the bus schedule and figure out a way to get to work. Because my mother grew up going on public buses, but most people, at least in Albuquerque, New Mexico, no longer have any working knowledge of how the bus system works. And so if we present them the bus schedule for the first time, they'll say, "Oh yeah, that would work. I'm only, come to think of it, 2 blocks from a bus stop, and my job is right in front of a bus stop."
I want to go back to decisions about medical treatment again. Can you think of a situation that shows where a single decision about treatment records, follow up, or other things involved in their medical treatments ended up making the real difference in someone's recovery?
I can, and it's not just one case; it's a lot of cases. Many times clinicians, and it's a well-known phenomenon that clinicians they're on a pace, they're on a schedule, they got to see a bunch of different patients, and so they will very sort of on a surface level listen to the complaints, make a note, recommend treatment, etc., etc. When I sit down with a client, I'm often sitting in that room with a client for an hour, and the client will describe to me their mechanism of injury, right? And then I will talk to them. Tell me what problems you are having. Tell me what issues you are having. And many times, I'm the one who says, "Gosh almighty, that sounds a lot like a torn rotator cuff." And I can see why the clinicians miss it, because they are working very quickly, and torn rotator cuffs are very difficult to diagnose. But I will literally have a client stand up and do a series of tests, and those tests are designed to elicit pain. When the client says, "Ooh, that hurts, I can't do that," I will tell them, "I think you have a torn rotator cuff. You need to go back to whoever it is that you're treating you. You need to describe to them what we have just gone through, and you need to tell them that you would like an MRI." And in many situations, the MRI reveals a full thickness rotator cuff that unfortunately will require surgery. But a lot of times clinicians will miss this because they are under a tight deadline, they've got a bunch of patients to see, and they're not going to take an hour to sit down with a client and say, "Tell me all the things that you're having difficulty doing. Tell me the motions that you make that will cause you pain."
It makes me think of that statement, where there's smoke, there's often fire. When we're having pain, we need to have that checked out. There might be something to it.
Sure, absolutely.
But when people start to feel better, they sometimes push themselves too fast. What misunderstandings tend to come up around feeling recovered versus actually being recovered?
I'm okay with a client who says, "I feel like I can go back to work. I'm not 100%, but I feel like I can go back to work." That's a client that I can work with. That's a client who I think will present well to a jury because they're not malingering. That's the term, that's the medical term. Somebody who is pretending to be more injured than they really are. The reality is, that most clients, when they go back to work, or most clients who are in a form of recovery, are not going to be 100% until well after my representation has ended for them. So a client who says, I'm a little sore, but I'm gonna push it. I'm gonna see if I can go back to work. That's somebody that I can live with. The problem client for me is someone who says to me, I'm 90% better. I want to continue to go to treatment and get 100% better. And the reality is that no clinician is going to make you 100% better. The only thing that's going to make you 100% better is God and time. I've seen physical therapists. I've had multiple orthopedic injuries. I can tell you firsthand that, you're not going to get 100% better after you see the doctor, after you have surgery, after you have physical therapy. It's going to take time. So the client who says, I understand that, I'm willing to deal with a little bit of pain, that's a client that I can work with. That's a client that I like very much. The ones who say, no, I need more chiropractic, I need more this, I need more that, because I'm only 95% better, now you're just running up the bill. There's nothing that a chiropractor or a physical therapist can do for you in that last 5 to 10% of recovery. And running up the bill means that we're going to have to pay those providers back. It's going to be less money in your pocket, and you're going to be angry with me because you think that I didn't get you enough money.
For clients who mainly speak Spanish, or for households where family members have mixed languages, what kinds of challenges come up in following medical instructions or communicating with providers?
Sure. It's not so much the communicating with providers part that is difficult, because this is Albuquerque, New Mexico, and I think in the state of New Mexico there are officially 260,000 Spanish speakers who speak Spanish as primarily their only language. The numbers are actually probably quite a bit higher than that. But most of these clinics, most of these providers have figured out a workaround. Even if the doctor himself or herself does not speak Spanish, they will have an assistant, they will have a nurse, they will have a tech who speaks Spanish and will be able to translate. But the biggest problem, the biggest access to adequate medical treatment is many Spanish speakers simply they don't have a primary care physician. If they are undocumented, and we represent tons of undocumented people, and if some of the viewers have an issue with that, I don't particularly care, because I represent human beings. I don't ask them, how did you get into this country? My job is to represent them and help them. But if you don't have health insurance, if you're not on Medicaid, if you don't have private health insurance, if you don't have an Obamacare plan, you may not have a primary care physician. And so the only place that you ever go for medical attention is to the emergency room. And so many times people have this perception that the only way they could ever seek medical attention, and the only injury that matters at all, is a serious injury which would require a trip to the ER. And so in those situations where we have a client who doesn't have a family doctor, we gotta move heaven and earth to get them hooked up with the right medical treatment and services that they need. Now, fortunately, we know many clinics in this community that are willing to treat people on a letter of protection. They'll say, look, if your client recovers something, please contact us so that we can make arrangements for the payment of this bill. But that's the biggest issue. It's not so much the translation part, it's literally hooking these people up with the services that they need.
And then long recoveries can strain people emotionally. What have you seen helps clients stay grounded when the process feels slow or unpredictable?
Sure. Honesty more than anything else. Telling them, look, it's going to be a long process. It's going to be a long recovery. You have a good case. But it's going to take a while to do this, and because it is a good case, the insurance company is going to dig in its heels. So as much as you would like to obtain a recovery in the next 6 months, it's going to be more like a year and a half. I am actively preparing for trial on a case that's well over 3 years old right now. But if you maintain contact with the client, if you have good communication, if the client is telling you, hey, I'm having this problem, I'm having that problem, etc., usually that diffuses the situation. There are a lot of funding sources out there for clients. They do charge a very high interest rate, but charging a high interest rate on a short-term loan is much better than a client losing his vehicle, much better than a client losing his house. And so sometimes if a client says, hey, I don't want to do this, but I'm in a bind, I need $4,000, is there anything you can do for me? We will connect them to funding sources that will, as I say, charge them about a 20% interest rate. But once the case settles and we pay those people back, usually the client says, yeah, I get it. They had to do that. They're a business. They have to charge an interest rate, and I'm better for it.
And then, David, where I want to wrap this up today is for listeners who are dealing with lingering injuries or long-term treatment, what helps them get a clear sense of what to expect as time goes on?
Normally, the people that we try to refer our patients to, our clients to, are good communicators. A lot of these folks are in the business to help people that have been injured in accidents. So when we send a person to these clinics, very often the doctors and clinicians at these clinics are really good communicators, unlike, say, a hospital where the goal is to get them in, get them out, get them going as quickly as you can. The key, I think, to any business, and I know that you're an entrepreneur, I know that you've been in business, and I think you would agree with this. The key to any business is good communication between the service provider, me, the lawyer, the doctor's office that we refer them to, and the user of those services, the patient, the client. And if you can establish a good form of communication, if you can answer a client's questions in a reasonably quick turnaround, that usually avoids a lot of misunderstandings. The problem that I see, and historically where attorneys really get themselves in trouble, is where they kind of treat the client, they take the client for granted. They're not quick to return phone calls. They're not quick to explain, well, this is why we can't do this is why we have to do that, etc., etc. Attorneys get themselves in trouble all the time because of that sort of attitude.
And David, that's where we'll leave it today. Thank you so much for your insights. This is it's been enlightening for me, and I hope the audience feels the same way.
Thank you so much for having me.
Folks, that's it for today's episode of Justice in Two Languages. To learn more about attorney David Elias Idinopulos and his team at Elias Law, visit abogadoelias.com. You'll find resources in English and Spanish to help you understand your rights and feel supported throughout your recovery. Thank you so much for listening, and please leave a review, and subscribe to the show so you don't miss the next one. We'll see you then.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.